It was supposed to be an ordinary Saturday in Lexington, Kentucky, the kind of quiet afternoon when sunlight filters softly through oak trees and children's laughter drifts from distant yards. On that day, 6-year-old Amanda Cole sat on the wooden porch, playing with her favorite stuffed rabbit. Her mother, Caroline, had gone to the supermarket for a quick errand. Inside the house, her stepfather, Daniel Rooker, promised to keep an eye on her. Everything looked peaceful, almost idyllic. But behind that calm, something dark was waiting, something that would change every life in that little town forever. When Caroline returned only a few hours later, the house was silent. The front door was locked. Amanda's shoes still stood neatly by the rug. Her rabbit lay on the porch steps, one ear bent, and Amanda was gone. No signs of struggle, no broken windows, not a single trace. It was as if the child had simply vanished into the air. Police arrived within minutes. They searched the yard, the woods, the nearby ponds. Neighbors joined in, calling her name until their voices broke. But Lexington's golden afternoon had already turned cold. That night, floodlights illuminated the quiet street, and reporters whispered about the perfect disappearance. Caroline stood trembling in her driveway, her eyes fixed on the small house that had once felt safe. Beside her, Daniel cried before the cameras, claiming a monster had taken his family's joy. No one knew then that the monster he spoke of was much closer than anyone could imagine. 5 years later, the truth would finally be found. Not in the woods, not by the rivers, but behind a single locked door where silence had been screaming all along. That morning began like so many others. The scent of pancakes filled the little wooden house at the end of Maple Street. Caroline hummed softly while stirring the batter, her daughter Amanda dancing barefoot across the kitchen floor, wearing her yellow polka dot dress. Daniel sat at the table, newspaper unfolded, coffee steaming in his hand. He looked like any ordinary man enjoying a quiet weekend with his family. Amanda was talkative, full of stories about the birds in the garden and the shapes of clouds she'd seen the day before. Caroline smiled, but she noticed the tension that sometimes shadowed Daniel's expression. He was distant, polite, yet strangely watchful. When Amanda laughed, his eyes didn't soften. They lingered a second too long, unreadable. Caroline had learned to dismiss the unease. Life had already been difficult. Losing Amanda's biological father had left wounds she tried to heal. Daniel, an electrician by trade, had seemed dependable, even gentle. He'd promised them safety, a fresh start. But safety can be an illusion, especially in houses where silence feels heavier than walls. By late morning, Caroline decided to run her errands. She asked Daniel if he could watch Amanda. His answer came quickly. Too quickly. "Of course," he said, smiling faintly. "Go ahead. We'll play in the garden." Caroline kissed her daughter's forehead before leaving. Amanda waved from the porch, sunlight dancing in her hair. Neighbors later remembered seeing her twirling in the yard, pretending to be a fairy queen. Then, sometime after noon, she went back inside to get a drink of water. No one ever saw her again. When Caroline returned less than 2 hours later, Daniel was sitting on the porch, cigarette in hand, face blank. "Amanda's gone," he said flatly. Panic ripped through her. She screamed her daughter's name, ran through the house, the garden, the street. Every door opened, every corner checked. Nothing. The police arrived quickly. They questioned Daniel, who repeated the same calm story. She'd been playing outside, he'd gone briefly to the basement, and when he came back, she was gone. No noise, no struggle. It all sounded too neat, too rehearsed. Still, with no evidence, the case was labeled as a likely abduction. As the sun fell behind the trees, search teams fanned out with flashlights and dogs. Caroline stood frozen on the front lawn, whispering her daughter's name into the wind. In that moment, Lexington lost its light, and no one realized that the truth was still locked inside the house, waiting, patient, and silent. Within hours, the quiet neighborhood turned into a search zone. Flashlights swept across the fields, police dogs barked in the dark, and the sound of helicopters echoed through the night. Every neighbor joined in, calling Amanda's name. Flyers were printed with her picture, a shy smile, green eyes, golden curls, and taped to lampposts, supermarkets, and church doors. The whole city of Lexington was watching, hoping. Daniel became the face of the tragedy. He gave interviews, appeared calm, sometimes even composed. His tears seemed carefully measured, his words perfectly chosen. "Please, "If anyone has her, bring her home," he said before the cameras, voice trembling just enough to be convincing. Caroline, by contrast, looked hollow, her eyes red from crying, her hands shaking as she clutched Amanda's stuffed rabbit. Detectives searched the house again and again. They found nothing suspicious, no fingerprints out of place, no signs of a struggle, no broken locks. Only one detail seemed odd. A small guest room upstairs was locked. Daniel told them it was for storage. They believed him. That moment would later haunt every investigator involved. Days became weeks. Rumors spread. Someone claimed to have seen Amanda at a gas station in Louisville. Another swore she'd been spotted at a shopping mall. Each lead dissolved into nothing. Caroline stopped sleeping. She sat by the window every night, waiting for a knock that never came. Daniel, on the other hand, withdrew. He rarely spoke, sometimes stayed up late in the basement, and dismissed every mention of Amanda with quiet finality. 2 weeks after the disappearance, police received an anonymous tip. A neighbor named Leroy Denton, a quiet handyman who lived down the street, might be involved. He had a criminal record, minor theft years ago, and that was enough for suspicion. Officers searched his house, finding an old hair clip and newspapers with Amanda's face on the cover. The neighborhood exploded with outrage, but tests showed no connection. The hair clip wasn't Amanda's. The man was innocent. Still, the damage was done. The town found its scapegoat, and Daniel found relief. For a while, people stopped looking at him. Months passed. The story faded from the headlines. The search ended. Caroline was a shadow of herself, her laughter gone, her life reduced to routine and guilt. She moved out, unable to bear the silence of that house. Daniel stayed behind, claiming he needed time to heal. No one realized that healing was the last thing on his mind. Behind one locked door, Lexington's greatest secret remained untouched, and Amanda's story was far from over. 5 long years had passed since Amanda Cole's face disappeared from every news channel and missing person poster. Time had dulled the shock for most of Lexington, except for Caroline, who now lived in a small apartment at the city's edge, her life quietly haunted by a room she could never forget. Daniel still lived in the same house on Maple Street. From the outside, it looked freshly painted, neat, almost proud, as if trying to erase what had happened there. But the neighbors said something about it always felt wrong. The curtains never opened, the lights flickered at strange hours, and Daniel, once talkative, now ghost-like, rarely left his home. It was in early spring when the first complaint came. A new tenant who rented part of Daniel's basement storage noticed a faint smell seeping through the floorboards. At first, she thought it was damp wood or an animal that had died under the porch. But the odor grew thicker each week, sweet and sour, impossible to ignore. She mentioned it to Daniel, who smiled too quickly. "Old pipes," he said. "This house is ancient. I'll take care of it." But he never did. Weeks later, even the mail carrier noticed. "Something's off in there," he told a neighbor. "It's like rot." Daniel began lighting scented candles, opening windows even in the middle of the night. But nothing helped. The smell was stronger upstairs, right outside the locked guest room that no one had entered in years. One afternoon, the tenant confronted him. "Mr. Rooker," she said firmly, "that smell is unbearable. You need to fix it." He forced a smile, nodding, but behind his calm face was a storm. That evening, unable to find peace, he called a plumber. The man arrived the next day, climbing the stairs as Daniel followed nervously behind. The plumber stopped outside the guest room, sniffing the air. "This isn't mold," he said slowly. "It's something else, something bad." Daniel's hands trembled. "That room is private," he whispered. "You can't go in there." The plumber stared at him for a moment, unsettled. "Then I can't help you," he said, leaving without another word. That night, the tenant made an anonymous call to the police. A report landed on Sergeant Brandon's desk, the same officer who had led Amanda's case years ago. When he saw Daniel's name, his pulse quickened. He hadn't forgotten. Something deep inside told him the story wasn't finished. Within an hour, he was on his way to Maple Street, a flashlight in one hand and a quiet determination in the other. When Sergeant Brandon arrived at the old house, the sun was sinking behind the trees, throwing long shadows across the porch. As Daniel opened the door, his face pale but smiling faintly, the same smile that had once fooled everyone. "Evening, Sergeant," he said softly. "What brings you here after all this time?" Brandon lifted his badge. "We've had reports of a strange odor coming from your property," he said. "Just routine." Daniel hesitated, eyes darting toward the staircase. "It's probably a dead animal in the walls," he said quickly. "I've been meaning to take care of it." His voice cracked on the last word. Brandon didn't answer. He stepped inside, and the smell hit him like a physical weight. Heavy, sweet, unmistakable. The house looked neat, but something about its order felt unnatural, almost rehearsed. Candles burned on every table. Windows were open, though the air was cold. "I'll need to check upstairs," Brandon said. Daniel's shoulders stiffened. "That's not necessary." His voice was tight now. "The smell comes from the basement." Brandon's gaze lingered on the locked door at the end of the hall, the same one from years ago. "Then humor me," he said quietly. "Give me the key." For a long moment, Daniel didn't move. His hand shook slightly as he reached into his pocket. The key scraped against the lock, metal grinding against rust. When the door opened, the smell poured out like a wave. Brandon lifted his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and stopped on something beneath a dusty blanket on the couch. At first, it looked like a pile of old fabric. But then, through the folds, he saw it. A small hand, gray and delicate, frozen in time. Brandon's breath caught in his throat. "Call it in," he whispered to the officer behind him. Daniel fell to his knees, his face buried in his hands. "I didn't mean to," he muttered over and over, rocking back and forth. The room was silent except for the sound of Brandon's breathing. On a nearby table lay a child's drawing, faded and crumpled. Beside it, a small stuffed rabbit with one torn ear, Amanda's favorite toy. When the news broke, Lexington stood still. Reporters filled the street, cameras flashing through the night. Caroline arrived the next morning, her body trembling as she stepped into the house she had fled years ago. She stood in the doorway of that small room, staring at the couch, then at the window where sunlight struggled through dusty curtains. Her tears came quietly, as if she had no strength left to cry. Neighbors whispered in disbelief. They had eaten dinner with Daniel, trusted him, pitied him. Now they realized the monster had been living among them all along. And Sergeant Brandon, standing in the front yard under the flashing lights, could only repeat the same words to himself. 5 years. And she was here all along. After the discovery, the investigation intensified overnight. Forensics teams combed through every inch of the Maple Street house, photographing, cataloging, bagging each forgotten object as if they were pages of a nightmare. Among the evidence in Daniel's bedroom drawer, officers found a brown leather notebook, worn, creased, with Daniel's name written neatly on the first page. Sergeant Brandon opened it, expecting repair notes or bills. Instead, he found something much darker. The first entries were harmless, reminders about work, grocery lists, quiet reflections about grief. But soon the handwriting changed. The tone shifted from ordinary to obsessive. "She cries less now," one entry read. "She's finally quiet. The world outside would only hurt her." Another, dated months later, said, "Caroline doesn't know. She thinks I'm mourning, but Amanda is safe. I can hear her breathing upstairs." Brandon read in silence, his hands cold. It wasn't madness written on those pages. It was control, a desperate attempt to justify the unforgivable. Each line revealed the slow unraveling of a mind that saw cruelty as care, captivity as protection. He could almost hear Daniel's voice echoing in his head, calm, logical, terrifyingly sincere. The entries spanned years, describing Amanda's routines, when she ate, when she slept, when she sang quietly at night. "She doesn't understand yet," one note said. "But she will. I can't lose her too." Between some lines were stains, maybe water, maybe tears. Toward the end, the words grew fragmented. "She's weaker, won't drink the water. I can't open the door now. If she sleeps, maybe she'll be at peace." Brandon shut the notebook and felt his throat tighten. It wasn't just a confession, it was a map of Daniel's decaying mind. He turned to the forensic psychologist, Dr. Evelyn Moore, who later described it as a textbook case of delusional control, the kind where love and dominance become indistinguishable. "He didn't want to kill her," she explained. "He wanted to own her, to keep her frozen in a world he could manage." But the diary held another secret. In one of the back pockets, folded between the pages, were old medical records from Tennessee, Daniel's childhood files. A younger version of him had spent months in a juvenile facility after a violent incident involving his younger brother. The file mentioned obsessive behavior, emotional detachment, and a chilling line from a social worker. Displays protective fixation toward younger children, potential danger if left unsupervised. Brandon stared at those words for a long time. The truth began to settle like dust after a storm. Daniel hadn't become a monster overnight. He had been one all along, quiet, patient, and waiting for another chance to act. The next morning, Caroline was called to the station. When she saw the notebook, she didn't open it. She simply whispered, "I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to see it." Her voice cracked under the weight of years of denial. Outside, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, shouting questions about motives, about sanity, about evil. But inside, in the quiet of the evidence room, Brandon closed the file and murmured the only truth that mattered. Amanda never left that house, and he never let her live. The courthouse was packed on the first day of the trial. Reporters lined the steps, their cameras flashing as the man once known as the grieving stepfather was led inside in handcuffs. Daniel Rooker looked pale and detached, eyes fixed straight ahead as if the world around him no longer existed. He said nothing, not to the press, not to the crowd shouting his name. Inside the courtroom, the air was tense, a mixture of outrage, disbelief, and grief. Caroline sat quietly in the second row, clutching Amanda's stuffed rabbit. She hadn't spoken to anyone since the discovery. Her face was pale, but her posture steady, as if she had spent every tear long ago. When Daniel entered, she didn't flinch. She simply watched him pass, her silence louder than any accusation. The prosecution laid out the evidence piece by piece. The diary, the drawings, the photographs of the guest room, the small metal box filled with Amanda's belongings. Each exhibit was a window into years of control and deception. "This was not an act of madness," the prosecutor said. "It was a calculated prison built inside a family home." Expert witnesses took the stand. Dr. Evelyn Moore explained Daniel's psychological profile, the obsessive need to dominate, the twisted belief that he was protecting the very life he was destroying. In his mind, she said, he was her savior. In reality, he was her captor. The jury listened in silence. The defense tried to argue insanity, but Daniel's own words in the diary destroyed that claim. He had planned, reasoned, lied, and maintained a facade for years. Every line proved intention. Every sentence erased the possibility of innocence. When Caroline finally took the stand, the room held its breath. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with each word. She spoke of the morning she left for the supermarket, the emptiness that greeted her when she returned, the endless years of waiting, and the unbearable guilt. "I thought I was protecting my daughter," she said, "but the danger was already inside my home." Daniel didn't look at her. He stared at the floor, lips barely moving. When asked if he wished to testify, he rose slowly. "I only wanted to keep her safe," he said, voice flat, almost mechanical. "The world is full of monsters. I didn't want her to meet them." Brandon, sitting behind the prosecution, whispered under his breath, "You were the monster." After 3 weeks of testimony, the verdict was read. Guilty. On all counts: unlawful confinement, murder, psychological abuse. Daniel showed no emotion as the sentence was announced. Life imprisonment without parole. Caroline closed her eyes, not in triumph, but in quiet release. For the first time in 5 years, the word justice meant something again. Outside, the sky over Lexington was gray, heavy with rain. Sergeant Brandon stood on the courthouse steps, looking up at the clouds. He had seen many cases, but this one would stay with him forever. In his hand, he held a copy of Amanda's last drawing, a small house with a sun above it and 3 stick figures holding hands. Beneath it, Amanda had written in childish letters, "Home means love." He folded the paper carefully, knowing that for Amanda, home had been a prison. But now, at last, she was free. Free from fear, from silence, from the darkness behind that door. As the crowd dispersed and the cameras faded, Lexington returned to its uneasy calm. Yet, for those who had lived through the tragedy, the lesson remained. Monsters rarely come from the outside. Sometimes they sit quietly at the same table, smiling, waiting, while no one dares to look behind the door that's always locked. And in that truth, the final light of Amanda Cole flickered, eternal, reminding everyone that silence can hide the loudest screams of all.